So let's get to Justin. Justin in Texas, how are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
We are all right. You're on with Paul and Matt. What do you have for us today?
Hi, Paul. Hi, Matt.
Hey,
Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. I'm just looking at my notes here. So I don't want to put you on a pedestal or anything, Paul, but your work has been kind of instrumental on me, and I just had a few questions. If you'll indulge me, just a brief backstory of myself to put things in context. I was kind of raised in a conservative Christian home, Southern Baptist. Whole family's very fundamental Christian. Mom's dad was a pastor. Um, kind of accepted Christ at an early age and kind of lived that life all the way up through college. Make long story short, just some stuff that I was dealing with kind of made me start questioning things. Kind of, I guess I was more angry at God. Started reading the Bible, almost, I guess, to just disprove God. And um, parents were concerned and kind of encouraged me on some apologetic stuff. Read like Lee Strobel's Case for Christ, stuff like that. Some other apologetic books, and that kind of helped me kind of acknowledge, like at the time, with what I had known, I was like, well, I guess there is a God. Seems like this historicity of Jesus, like there was a person, so and he claimed to be God. So, and that's before coming across your stuff, and before the Bible tells me so, realizing that's really all that there was. And so I kind of got back my faith, but then through a little later some life-threatening stuff, I yeah, I basically kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm done fighting God. I kind of want to submit. And I was very passionate in Old Testament times and wanted to pursue a biblical archaeology degree. Thought maybe God wanted me to go into that to kind of prove the Bible was something I wanted to do. And kind of went to, Southwestern Theological Seminary, took all tons of courses, you know, Greek and all that. But long story short, that didn't turn out to me. I'm sorry to run on here, but trying to get to my point, I'm trying to see this. I've seen some videos you have, and some of that stuff has really resonated with me. But maybe about a little less than a year ago, found some time and kind of went back to it. Into the biblical archaeology round. I'm a pilot now, kind of finished flight school, had some time to kind of start looking into some stuff and trying to reconcile some things that I had as a worldview to my faith, and started coming up with questions. That's where I kind of started to find some of your videos and others, Kip Davis, Joshua Bowen, uh, name a few. And I got to a point where I really just started to, was unable to really kind of reconcile a lot of things that were brought up. And, this is kind of, I guess, a hard time for me at this point in my life, because I'm at a point where I don't want to, I guess, admit there isn't a God. And whether Jesus was real or not, that that the stories in the Bible aren't, really accurate, and at least historic in the historical sense. And I guess, I'm kind of very rooted now. I spent the last, well over a decade in a very Christian kind of centered, all my friends, family, and I know that that was kind of your situation, and I've got young kids. I've been kind of bringing them up, kind of Christian values. I've kind of talked to my wife about it, about some of the doubts and issues I'm having, but I'm kind of in that point where I'm like, man, I don't want to, I don't want to like, watch like maybe some of your videos and stuff that like, because what if I'm wrong? What if I'm misleading my family? And kind of that fear, um, and that like I'm
what's
terrified
the
of leading
worst
my
that could
family.
happen?
Um, I guess it's just the fear that like, what if I'm wrong? And like, there's been a few things. Like, I'm not a superstitious person, but like,
If you're wrong and you find out you're wrong, can't you change your mind? Isn't that what's happening now?
well, true. And like, so like, there's just little things too that like freak me out. I guess like I said, I'm not superstitious, but like, there was a time a few months ago I was, like, okay, God, you say you'll leave the 99, go after the one, sheep, and if I'm struggling here, and then my wife was like, hey, we've been to church, let's go to church. And I was trying to find every reason not to go. And all these different things kept happening. And I was like, well, no, I should go because what if this is something that's preventing me? There's a message for me, you know,
What were you hoping?
go there. And of course,
Justin, yeah, Justin, your story sounds a lot like mine. It sounds like you've seen some of my videos, and yeah, we're definitely very much, very very closely aligned. What were you hoping to get out of us tonight? How can we either
I
assure you
guess
or push you in
you,
one way or another, or what?
yeah, I'm sorry to run on. I know I'm kind of just going on. This isn't, I guess, the point of the show, but I guess
It
you've
kind of
been
is.
dealing with this.
I mean,
You've been
you're
kind of
giving
dealing with
us a look into what's going on in your head, and forgive me, but I feel like I'm talking to an atheist that's more afraid of saying they're an atheist than being an atheist.
That's probably fairly true. I guess my big question, I guess, is like, Paul, you've been dealing with this for many years now, and you have. I guess I wrote down the question, tried to put this in the right words, but um, how do you navigate this time in your life? How do you kind of reconcile these things that maybe you don't know or understand, um, with these views and that kind of fear that if you're wrong, like, and you're leading
Right.
your loved ones astray.
So yeah, I think you use the right word there. I think fear is a proper way to do this. The gravity of whether the Christian God is real or not. I'm assuming, based on this, sounds like you're in the Christian God camp. The gravity of whether the Christian God is true or not is obviously incredibly important, not only for ourselves and our loved ones, but it's eternal torment, right? It's not even so much the eternal bliss. I was actually, when I was around the point where you sounds like you are, I was very willing to give up the eternal bliss, but it's just like, oh man, don't give me or my loved ones that eternal punishment. Um, but as Matt alluded to there, at some point you need to at some point you do need to remind yourself that as long as you continue truth seeking, that if God is true and you continue truth seeking, God has nothing to fear from truth, right? So if you're afraid of watching Matt's videos or my videos because it might teach you something, then you are not actually truth seeking. Because if we're saying things that are false, no problem. I listen to things that are false every single day. In fact, I spend way too much time in my life listening to things that I know are false. But that doesn't harm, right? As long as you're heading that direction. So commit yourself to truth seeking. I say would be the one thing, and also, as Matt said, being willing to change your mind. Um, I you do have a relationship with your wife and kids to consider at this point, and for my life, that was handled incredibly poorly. I wish I had handled it very differently. There wasn't a lot of understanding there. So I'm hoping that you will find some a way to navigate that on your own terms, and that you can share that and have it not destroy the relationship if you don't want it to. And I guess my own advice there is don't let yourself be outed outside of your um, outside of your comfort zone. Also, if you're willing to go to church and that if that helps your relationship and with your kids and your wife, don't be afraid. Just like don't be afraid to watch my videos. Don't be afraid to go to church. You're not obligated to pray, and you're not obligated to do those things. You can just be there for your family. Those are choices you can make without making yourself a hypocrite. Um, But is fear of hell like the big sticking thing for you?
No, like, I feel like I'm at a point where I I can kind of admit to say that, I don't think I necessarily believe that um, reality anymore. Um, which is, I was talking to my dad the other day, and it's like, I wasn't coming out and saying, "Hey, I don't believe these things," but at the same time, what you said was actually really true. Like, that's been my whole mission in this entire journey, was like, all I want is the truth. Wherever that leads me, that's what I want. I just want the truth. And but it's still faced with that I'm at that point where it's like, I very much I wish I could go back to almost believing, because who wouldn't want to know that, when you die, there's this, you know eternal place for you to be with those you love. And so, I guess, yeah, it's not really just that fear of hell. It's just more of like, my whole, I guess, community is, I'm surrounded in. To come out would kind of almost be like I'm, outing myself in a very negative light to people. Um, and like I said, I've talked to my wife about it. She's understanding. She knows exactly what I'm going through right now. So that's a real plus. That was a big fear of mine, talking to her about it, but I eventually did. Um, but yeah, and I guess, like, I just, there has been a couple things, and I guess, were there ever times, I guess, for you, if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine, but where, like, you felt that you were maybe getting signs that you might be wrong, and I guess, how did you deal with that? Because, like I said, there's been times where I'm like, I show up, and the pastor talks about it. I would say, hey, there's the historical stuff, and if you have problems believing, like, it was just weird, because it's like, it was almost directed to me. And I'm not, like I said, not superstitious in that sense, but I don't know if you'd had certain experience when you were at this stage, and how you dealt with that.
For sure, and I think one of the things that really needed to learn was that it's possible to have experiences and be attributing them to the wrong thing. So you are clearly, the pastor's message is resonating with you well, but it would probably be a mistake to attribute that to God speaking specifically to you, because first of all, there's so many ways God could speak specifically to you if that was what was intended. But humans, our psyches are not actually that complex, in terms of there's so many things that resonate with most of us all at once, which is sometimes how cold reading works, or that motivational speakers can work. Like, we all kind of have basic emotional needs, and there's not that many strings to pull and manipulate for us to feel like that we're being spoken to directly. So I think a lot of that is just kind of divorcing yourself from the context and taking a look at it and saying, am I attributing this to something actual, or is there something more likely that it's attributed to? I sometimes it sounds like the pastor plucked out a verse, right, that's speaking exactly for you, but is that verse in context even meant that way? And obviously you're bringing your own. Everyone's bringing their own situation to it. Same can be true for a movie, right? We can all go to a movie, and if someone's down, they're bringing their different message to it than if someone's bringing up, but it can still speak to them. But a movie isn't made specifically for a person. These are just some things that I kind of had to consider as I was kind of experiencing the same thing as you. Though I will say, when I was sitting in the pew, one of the things that made me angry was that everyone around me, was spending no time thinking about whether it was true, and they were being blessed. And here I was spending all my time trying to figure out if it was true, and it seemed like I was being nothing but punished. So I kind of had a
Right.
different take on it. And so part of it was me just eventually throwing it to God and saying, you know what, God, um, the Holy Spirit is a requirement in this relationship. And right now, he's missing. So I'm putting it in your court. I don't know what it would take to convince me, but if you want to have a relationship with me, I'm standing here open to it, and I will not reject it. But I do need you to take the next step. And I know Christians will say, well, that sermon was the right step. No, that's not really the next step. And once I was able to let go and say, you know what, if God wants me, he can find me, was for me that final release, that final moment where it was like, you know what, I've done all that I can to get there. And the Bible admits that we humans can't cross that path. So now I'm just waiting for God to put out his hand in whatever form that takes. And maybe you can make that your own promise with yourself or your own promise with God that, you know, if he exists and he's real, that you will accept that invitation back. But until then, you're free to live your life as an atheist, as though, you know, with what your head is telling you. Does that sound like something that might help?
Yeah, I guess my biggest problem with that is that I have is I've very much kind of, when I came back, was kind of very much involved in like a more reform type theology. And I guess my question is on that, like, I know there's, Romans 9 talks about, Paul talking, going through, you know, well, who are you, oh man, to talk back to God? Shall the thing that was formed say to the one that formed it, why did you make me this way? Or, why that God has some vessels for dishonor, some for honor. And well, I understand like kind of the overall insanity kind of in that, but in this kind of
Right.
context, it's kind of like, well,
sure, but isn't a prerequisite? Isn't a prerequisite to that plan still that you must intellectually assent that God exists? And if God can't provide you with what it would take for that intellectual ascension, how can you actually submit to something that you can't intellectually assent to? Like, isn't that where you're at?
I guess, but I guess what the fear then is like with that reformed like theology type of mindset is that, oh, well, then you're just a vessel for dishonor, right? You're just the thing that, God didn't, intend for glory, kind of that kind of thing. I guess that's, maybe the root.
Okay, but let's say that's true. Let's say that you were created, Justin, and you are just like me at this point, not intended to go to heaven. If whatsoever God intends it, is there anything that you can do about that? If God doesn't intend you to go to heaven, is there anything you can do about that?
No.
So, in a lot of, I don't go to therapy. I probably should, but I know one of the things that's often talked about is, dealing with the things you can control and not the things you can't control. That would be an ultimate thing. If God doesn't intend you to go to heaven, you spinning your wheels in the one and only life you're going to get doesn't seem super helpful to me. Does it seem helpful to you?
No. Again, it's just, it's a lot of the indoctrination that I have.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Do you understand? Hard to break.
Yeah. That's one of the things is that, healing, and we can't rush healing. We can't rush experience. There's certain things in life that no matter how much we want to jump ahead, we can't. I guess what we can do on this side is say that I've, both for myself and for many people I've talked to and gotten to know, eventually that does calm down. Eventually you come to accept what you can't change. And that is, for me, I can't change that I don't think a God exists. There's nothing I can do. So, yeah. And obviously with the family and the friends and stuff, you may want to start branching out a bit now. You're in a position I kind of envy, that it sounds like you may have some overlap. And this might be a good chance to join some clubs that have nothing to do with religion. Join a climbing group or a book club, or just get to know some folks that aren't there because of common religious beliefs. I was shocked how shallow the friendships were with the people who we were only had things in common because we sat in the same building on Sunday mornings. Those fell away very quickly when they determined that I wasn't believing what they believed. So, I would, even if even if you do end up staying a Christian and staying a theist, those are people you can convert down the road if you eventually done that. I would start doing some backups on your social circles, if that makes sense.
I don't want to say I'm completely isolated. Like, I do have, and even the friends that I have that are very much in that circle. I know it wouldn't necessarily be like I'm going to cut you off kind of situation. So I know it's not the same scenario that I guess you went through, but I think no, they're not going to necessarily cut me off because of these views. But I think they'd be more like my wife in that sense. But yeah, it's just maybe like you said, maybe we all need to go to therapy, but it's 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 something that has been fresh for me, and I appreciate you talking to me.
Okay. Well,
If I can,
thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
There's a curious thing that may or may not be helpful, but anytime I hear somebody talking about how they heard a sermon, that they heard a message from a preacher or whatever, and it seemed like it was tailored just for them, and that ends up kind of reinforcing beliefs. The thing to remember is that, first of all, the source text is something that has resonated with people strongly since it was written. People are constantly finding messages in there, and not to do if you seek and you shall find, but if you go in looking for messages, if you're desperate for messages, you're going to hear them. But when you think there's a message specifically for you, the question I always asked was, if God has this message specifically for me, why not just tell me, instead of making a preacher pick a passage that resonates with me at that moment? Why the complicated route to get a message to me? It is very much in line with like creationist views on the vastness and complexity of the universe is like a Rube Goldberg machine if your goal is to create humans. Why do we need, the Andromeda galaxy and these other things? It's all too strong or too much stuff. And so if God's got a message and you're open to it and you're open to it, why would God have to go through such a circuitous route to get to you?
Yeah, and I mean it's very specific. Like that, the morning of that specific. If I was gonna go more into that, that was the morning I talked to my wife. I told her everything. So like it wasn't. And I'm not going to convey exactly what was said the way it was meant, but it was something that like even she was like that was totally like it was right in that moment. Like I talked to her about what I was dealing with. Still said I would go. We had like. So there was a weird situation, new opening of some place that caused traffic. We were going to be late. We didn't even think we were going to make it in time, but we still went anyway. And then we get in there, and then part of the whole message was parts of history and stuff, and people having doubts. And it was literally exactly what we had just talked about. And it wasn't just me taking meaning from it. She took meaning from it because it was just that kind of lined up thing. And I understand coincidence and all that, but like when the person you just are that married for over a decade, and when like we met on Christian Mingle, and you tell her like you're having all these doubts and all this stuff, and then you go, and then even she's like looking at you as the pastor's talking, kind of thing, like, hey, the thing we talked about.
Well, how should she react? I mean, she knows that you're having your doubts. She hears a sermon that addresses doubts. Of course, she's going to look at you. That doesn't add to it.
Right. True.
I'll tell you the real concern here. My grandfather was basically had an opportunity to invest some money in an oil rig. And he was a fairly new Christian, had received his copy of the Living Bible from my mom for Christmas, and decided that he would pray and ask about it. And he opened up the Bible, and I was told, because they had a big family meeting to tell us all about it, that there was a passage that he stumbled across that said, invest your money. Well, I've searched every word in the Living Translation, and while the word invest does exist there, there's not anything that says invest your money. So already I think he was misrepresenting the passage he stumbled across. And instead, he just happened to run across a passage that was like, invest was one of the key ideas and words in it, and took that as if God was affirming this. And if that was the case, then what God wanted him to learn was don't invest with charlatans. So I'm going to make you learn the lesson the hard way, because he invested money and it did not bear fruit.
Yeah.
You know the story in John. The story of doubting Thomas in the book of John, where Thomas came and didn't believe, but God told him, "Blessed are going to be people who don't need the evidence to believe." That would probably resonate very strongly with you right now as well, right?
Sure. Yes.
But the whoever wrote the Gospel of John seems to me added that story because people were doubting, and the disciples, if they were believers at all, were dying off, and then they needed, this was a polemic. This was something that they needed to put into the book because this was a universal thing. It's not strange for religion. In fact, all religions kind of have passages about what to do with doubt because they know that's part of the human condition. And certainly it's something that pastors talk about a lot right now is people facing doubt. I guess I'm just jumping in with Matt here and saying these are messages that have resonated for thousands of years, and not, and unless they were talking about you by name from the pulpit, even then I would be suspicious, because perhaps then your wife has been talking to someone and that message got back to the pulpit.
Yeah. There's an episode of The West Wing.
Go ahead.
There's an episode of The West Wing where Toby is at synagogue, and the rabbi is preaching about the death penalty thing. And as it happens, there's a death penalty case that's pressing, and so basically a friend of his went to his rabbi to get him to preach a sermon on this. You can't rule out that type of stuff either. Not that we need any explanation like that. Pick a random Sunday, and in most Christian churches, you're going to hear about doubters. In most Christian churches, you're going to hear about non-believers, even if it's in passing, because they're the ones that they're supposed to reach. Go ye therefore unto all the nations, preaching the gospel. And there's going to be scoffers and all this stuff. I can't count the number of times I heard sermons about non-believers and never heard the word atheist, never heard an argument for the existence of God, never heard anything other than we're reinforcing the Great Commission and reaffirming the strength of our convictions. And because we know that there are tons of people sitting in the pews that either don't believe or are struggling with doubts. And by the way, there are tons of people standing in the pulpit who are in the exact same position, which is why we have the Clergy Project. Knowing that that's the case, it makes sense that there's frequently going to be discussions about doubt, and that some of them are going to resonate more with some than others. For me, if I'm struggling with doubt and I am sincere, as I was, then it's grossly immoral for God to leave me floundering like that and to give me nothing more than maybe this was a sermon that God intended for me, because I realized I could say that about 90% of the sermons.
Right. And like I said, I've been in church basically my whole life, and I know the difference. I know what you mean about, it seems like this pastor's just talking to me, or I'm getting this message. I guess in that sense, like, and we've been to that specific church. We've been to it before, and nothing has ever come up like this before. It was just, and I'm not gonna be able to explain the nuance of everything, but it was more of just the way it was said, the specific references that were made was specifically to the things that I had just talked to my wife about like an hour and a half ago before that. So that's why it was only one of those things where it was like, are you kidding me? like, and I've had those experiences before, and this was kind of not like that. It was very more directed. And I understand that is these things in church. I've heard them all before, but it was just more of like the specific reference to different historical things, points that I had brought up with my wife were specifically made at that point. And so that's why it was just so hard at that time to just go, yeah, this was just coincidence, and that's kind of how I brushed it off kind of to my wife. But at the same time, it's just like, I know that because I've been on that other side and know kind of how she's going to interpret that it was like, well, this was specifically what, it was asked for, And so, like I said, I'm not going to provide a nuance. I know exactly what you're saying. It's just like, that was that one experience that I've had since then. And nothing else really coming close. And so I understand what you talk about, well, God, you know what it takes to convince me. And, so that didn't convince me. That obviously wasn't for me. And I totally understand that line of logic and that argument. But yeah, it's just that these are some of those things. And like I said, it's very new for me and difficult because of that perceived possible judgment from those close to me. And so far, like I said, wife was very understanding. It wasn't as bad. She's more afraid of what that meant for us. Like maybe I didn't want to be with her anymore, which isn't the case. So, yeah, it's just trying to navigate this has been a lot.
Website.
Oh,
Paul's
Paul,
muted.
you are muted. Do I need to restart again or refresh?
Oh, he's refreshing.
Yeah,
Paul is very refreshing.
I assume you can hear me again.
Yes.
Yep.
We when I used to work on the pulpit, we always used to say that when there were technical problems, that was demons that God must have really had something special in mind that night, because the demons were super attacking. I feel like tonight we had Satan has something very extra special planned tonight, and the angels are attacking our tech. But
yeah, I saw that comment, and I even thought about it because I was like borderline about to be like, well, if God doesn't want me to have this conversation, I guess y'all won't be able to bring it up. But obviously that wasn't the case.
Right, so God's trying to stop me. Anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, I've just seen a couple people in chat talk about like maybe his wife talked to the pastor, and I just want to say that there's no possible way of that. Like I said, we had this conversation
watching the chat while you're talking is a huge mistake as it is. So
yeah, I know.
Any so Justin, I hope we helped.
Not a point.
Are there any final thoughts that you weren't able to get out, or that anything else that you needed to bounce off of us before we let you go?
No, that's really the main things that I want to bring up. And like I said, I'd seen some reviews, and I guess one of those main points was that kind of like Romans 9 theology, and just was curious on your take on it. And, that was very helpful. So like I said, I very much appreciate your time and y'all talking to me. And
absolutely. Feel free to call again. This, as long as you commit yourself to finding the truth, then you really don't need to, worry about all this stuff. Eventually, as long as you're truth seeking, you'll land somewhere good, and God won't leave you floundering if that's really what you want, and He really exists.
Yep, truth's all I want, brother. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks, Justin. Bye.
Thanks.
Hey, do you think this clip just fell out of a coconut tree? No. It did. Okay, now technically I did build the channel into a coconut tree and it did fall out. And also that our internet router is up there. Actually, in a lot of ways, this production fell out of a coconut tree, but we could only afford that because people like you supported us for $5 a month over where is that, Eric?
Patreon.com/call the line, and
That's right.
Jimmy will,
You got it.
yeah, be grateful. Yeah.
We have an exclusive patron podcast over there. Check it out. Thumbs up with it, Eric. We talked about this in the meeting. We have to both.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go.